Thank you for that lovely introduction. I wrote it myself. Yes, it's a bit of a change of topic. I'm going to. Oh, thank you. I do have a bit of a cough, so I hope I get through this. It's such a pleasure to be here and see a full room of people. And I'm going to talk to you about decolonizing research. And here we have Audre Lorde, one of our leading Black feminist thinkers and writers, an inspirational spirit who has long gone. But she inspires us in terms of her quote, "It's not our differences that divide us, it's our inability to recognize and celebrate those differences." It's so simple, but so powerful, because what we really have to think about is the other ways of knowing that we hold within us and enlighten our way. So often, we need to find the courage to actually talk about our experiences and go against convention. And that's what Audre is talking about in her words. Our academic analysis is sometimes so stilted and doesn't include the personal as the political. And we have to find our voice and expose different truths about power and privilege, and think about what are our pedagogies, our other ways of thinking, and our pedagogies of resistance. I think that academic work and academic research is fundamentally about other positions, seeing through the eyes of others, having these different truths. And I often think that what we do is never an accident. And I want to start by thinking through the idea of indigenous knowledges, the idea that there are hidden genealogies in all of us that actually ground us in the way we approach research and approach research topics. So for me, my unsung hero was my grandmother. Of course, I never met her. She died before I was born, but I learned about her. And she was one of those transformative agents for social change that we so often don't hear about or know about because there's no histories told of these people. She was a Bible woman in Trinidad, because that's where I'm from, the Caribbean, and she couldn't read and write. She was converted by the missionaries, and then she used the Bible to go out and actually educate women in the bush. So she, like what she did was actually raise the race. She was part of the post-colonial movement for independence, but she didn't know it. She was never given that history or talked about. In fact, my grandfather, who became a minister in the church, was always the one who had the accolades. And this is very much when we think about the civil rights movement and we think about Martin Luther, we don't know about Ella Baker and the women that drove the movement for the voters' registration. So there's so often stories that are not told. And we need to think about these post-colonial activists and ground our knowledge in their experiences. And for me, Black feminism has come out of the movement of hidden genealogies, hidden indigenous knowledges. And for us to decolonize our research and to decolonize, like we just heard about I can't even say it. In order to decolonize and think about race and gender and how it's affected, we've got to start with ourselves and position ourselves in that research. It's not something objective and outside of us. We have to root ourselves in our research. And for me, Black feminism has given me that pathway into understanding how we can, unearth these hidden stories. And Black feminism places the body in the center of analysis. So often, knowledge in the West is very objectified, it's very out there, it's beyond you, it's not part of you. But anything that you're doing, what I always say, what we study and what interests us is never an accident. And so you may ask, why JAP-GP is something of interest to you, and then begin at that point and see how you are rooted in explaining the things that you need to explain. And so, so I've just shared some private information with you about myself, that my grandmother and where I'm from. And there isn't a day that doesn't go past when I'm walking through the corridors of power in university where someone might ask me where, I've been asked very often when I go into a boardroom meeting, they think I'm the coffee lady, or I'm not given, my body does not give off authority when I walk into a lecture room very often. I taught for many years with a colleague and I had more qualifications than him, but every single time I would walk into the classroom, the students would ask for him and not for me, because he embodied knowledge. So I have shared some private information, and I think this is a very powerful quote by Feli Simmons in my book, Black British Feminism. She says, "For Black women and women of color, visible difference means it's impossible to escape the body inside the teaching machine. We end up sharing private information just to share a point." So we are compelled as women of color to share information, to gain legitimacy. If LGBT, disabled, people who are visibly different, raced and classed through their culture, they're asked to share private information. And our bodies are often, in research, laid bare and dissected as those who are disadvantaged or on the margins of society. We're interrogated. We see studies on inequality, and I'm going to talk to you about the study that I did for the Deaton Review. It's a massive piece of work with Angus Deaton, the Nobel laureate of inequality, economic inequality, and I had the privilege of working with him. But what I realized is that, we look at inequality, but we hardly look at the elites and where the sources of power are. So within Black feminism, we need to turn research on its head and look at those in power and how power works. And what I would argue very strongly is that, white men don't have to admit their bodies into theory. So, for example, they can opt for silence. So we can talk about ChatGP, but you don't have to talk about who you are as the researcher that's looking at that, whereas I always have to position myself. So Black feminism recognizes this issue of power and authority and how it's placed in different bodies and different times. So I want to share with you some of the work I've been doing around intersectionality. Have you all heard about intersectionality? Hands up. Oh, that's good. It's become quite a buzzword. I've had students and people saying to me, I'm an intersectional person, because I'm a bit of everything and stuff like that. But actually, it's a really deep-rooted Black feminist theory. It came from Black feminism. It came from the 1880s and the mid-1880s. Sojourner Truth said, "Ain't I a woman? You don't think of me as a woman. You don't think of me as a Black slave of either being a woman, you treat me like a man, you expect things from me, but ain't I a woman?" So, it's a powerful, deeply rooted theory. And in order for us to understand difference and inequality, intersectionality is a key theoretical framework. So I don't want it to be a buzzword. I want us to drill down and think about it. So here we have a definition by some colleagues of mine. Anne Phoenix is a wonderful Black feminist theorist at UCL as well. They say, intersectionality aims to make visible the multiple positions that constitute everyday life, And this is the key thing, the power relations in everyday life. And then the other quote by Prince very much is talking about structures. So firstly, we have everyday life, and this quote is saying, gender is lived in the modalities of ethnicity and class. So you can't just think about gender without thinking about your ethnicity as a white woman, as a Muslim woman, as a black African woman. You have to think about ethnicity, class, nationality in the modalities of gender and race, and class in the modalities of gender and nationality. It all comes together. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a very tough thing to actually do in terms of research. And the Angus Deaton report that I've done with a wonderful young white researcher, we were told, go away and do like 10,000 words, and we came back with 70,000 words. Because to do intersectionality, you have to ask multiple questions on each topic. So if you're looking at employment, you have to do by race, gender and race and class, and you have to break it down into so many, in so many lenses. And then finally, Kimberly Crenshaw is like the godmother of intersectionality, and she talks about intersectional subordination. So she says, here, intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism. So you just don't glue them together, but it's an analysis that you have to undertake in order to look at subordination. So subordination for her is the key thing. It has to be analyzed holistically. So there was a book called Many Voices, One Chant in the 1980s, and I was involved then in looking at this intersectionality of Black women. And I'm not very good at graphics, but I did this. And if you noticed in the previous slide, I'll go back, there was the Arc de Triomphe. Were you wondering what it was? For me, well, this is my version of the Arc de Triomphe, because for me, Black feminism, as I said, places the body at the center. So if you're a white working class woman, if you're a Black middle class academic, you can imagine that you are in the center in that star. And all these avenues, because the Arc de Triomphe, remember there's avenues going all into it, they come from all different directions. And along these avenues of oppression, inequality and disadvantage flow. So class disadvantage, gender disadvantage, racial disadvantage can flow and come and affect the life of that person in the middle. So, it's a theory that I've been involved in called embodied intersectionality. And embodied intersectionality means that you experience all these avenues and all these powerful forces in your life within your internal identity. So you live out. If somebody thinks that you are, you've been racialized and criminalized, for example, you live out that life. You experience it. The social world will construct you as such, and you imbibe it, and you can react against it, and you can, different forces at different times can affect your life. So for me, embodied intersectionality is the way that the surface of the body is actually mediated by all these forces. So you can have different kinds of forces. You can have historical and situational. These might be about post-colonialism, for example, migration and refugees, forces of post-coloniality and the poverty and the wars in our nations, in Syria and the Middle East. All of those things will create an avenue of disadvantage that and lack of nationality and citizenship and your immigration status can really affect inequalities and the way you experience the world. But there are other kinds of embodied life course disadvantages and advantages around your sexuality, your ethnicity, culture, age, disability. All of these things we see in our legislation, like the Equality Act, the 2010 Equality Act, which I had the pleasure of working with. You know, Lord Lester on that. But what we have with things like age and disability, they can be life course things. You may be born with disability, but you may become disabled. As you get older, you know, aging becomes a problem. I'll tell you a funny story about aging. I can tell you so many funny stories, but not just coffee lady stories. Well, yeah, I'll tell you this one, because I had to write a proposal for a research center and at UCL, and the Institute of Education. It was a research center on social justice and human rights in education. And I had to put a proposal to the board, to the Senate. And I talked about race and class and gender, all the big ones. And this elderly professor, white male professor, he put his hand up and he said, "But you haven't talked about age. I'm discriminated against because of my age." I mean, he was going to go on a massive pension and enjoy his life, probably in a yacht in the Mediterranean, but he felt disadvantaged. And he made me rewrite, the universe made me rewrite it all to include white men with their disadvantage. Anyway, that's just a funny story. So yeah, everybody likes to be vulnerable. Everybody now likes to, you know, the woke atmosphere of vulnerability and yeah, I won't go there. Save it for the questions. Yeah, so we have all these lifelong life course issues. But for me, I think a really fundamental one is social class. And it's something that in Britain, I don't know why it's the big elephant in the room in the UK. And when the legislation was drawn up around equality, actually, you know, socioeconomic status was meant to be included, but it was taken out. It's always taken out. So whiteness becomes this blob. You know, there are elites and there are, you know, gypsy traveler communities, yet they're all defined very much in the same way. So we need to think about social class. When we talk about racism, you know, there are elites in our society and there are, again, you know, top and bottoms. So we need to actually disaggregate and look at inequalities much more sensitively and recognizing all these levels of difference. It's not easy. So here is some of the findings for the Deaton Review. I know we won't have very much time, so this is just like a headline thing. And I want to show you how intersectionality can be operationalized. So I'm a qualitative ethnographic researcher, and I had to work with a team of statisticians and scary people that know numbers. And they did the hard work. I did the conceptualizing. And so here we have, you know, inequalities across a range of areas. So looking at, this is the intersectionality. We have men, women, Southeast and Northeast, guess what they are? Proxies for? Class, yes, because there's no other way to gather that information. We have Indian, Bangladeshi, and Caribbean. And so here we see, I want you to look at the brown and the gray ones. That is Caribbean, Black Caribbean, and Bangladeshis. When it comes to unemployment, so the middle line, of course, is the white British. So look, high unemployment. High unemployment in the Southeast, that's the red bar. Go to the wealth category. And sorry, I don't have a clicker thing. But if you look at the wealth category, Bangladeshis, isn't that appalling? Caribbean, twice, and the Northeast. So can you imagine being a Bangladeshi living in the Northeast? It's not good. And unemployment and poverty and wealth, you know, lack of wealth, lack of housing, lack of resources has something that has absolutely exploded for certain groups, particularly Black Caribbean and Bangladeshis and Pakistanis with COVID. And if we look, and this is the sad story, if we look at university entry, we see that Bangladeshis are more likely to go to university. So even though they go to university, their wealth, their wages, and levels of unemployment are high. So their desire for education, the desire to improve is there. And we live very much in a meritocracy where we believe that if we work hard, we will do well. But if you're locked into poverty in the Northeast, if you're locked into poverty because of circumstances of migration, and what we found in the Deaton Review, the period that you came to Britain and the social class and the country that you come from really matters. So Indians that came early on in the 70s didn't have the educational capital that the later Indians do, so we see Indians doing very well. And entering university, they have higher wages, they're the darker grey. So can you see, automatically, if you do an intersectional analysis, you suddenly see the picture of the world in a very different way. I told you I'm an ethnographic, educationalist. So just to, you saw the state of play with the Bangladeshis, low wages, high unemployment, very little wealth. It's shocking. And so I did some research looking at Muslim girls in schools, and I found a whole range of issues to do with their religion, their ethnicity, their class, and where they lived, in what school. And so these are some of the findings. Firstly, there was regulation of dress and behavior by the schools in terms of wearing the hijab. So there would be comments from the teachers, and it was ridiculed, it was policed. One of the funny, you want another funny story? One teacher did say, she said she was a white teacher, she was the head of inclusion, and she said, all these Muslim girls, they're wearing makeup and earrings, but they wear the hijab. Don't they know that's un-Islamic? And I thought, since when is she an expert on Islam? But, so, I'm glad you liked it, because I did want to be a stand-up comedian once, but honestly, research has such funny stories. Yeah, she said she was going to bring Cosmo in, magazine, but she thought it would shock the girls, like they'll go into anaphylactic shock or something. I do know, heads of inclusion, I don't know. But anyway, there was surveillance by the family and community around sexuality, and particularly the boys. So in the school I was in, and when we're talking about Muslim communities, they're not a blob either, because you have, we had Somali in this one school, Somali, Uganda, Burundi, Iran, Afghani, Pakistani, I mean, so many different countries with different codes and different cultures, and coming at different times from different social classes. And the Iran and Afghanis were particularly more socially mobile, and the Burundi, and particularly, there's another sad story. There was one girl, the teachers told me, do not even go there and interview her, because we're going to expel her. She never comes in. When she does, she's very truculent and difficult. And when I did talk to her, she was from Burundi, she wore the whole niqab, and there was, it was dirty, it was black, and there was food down the front. And she told me that her mother, they were refugees from Burundi, her father had been killed. She was looking after 3 children in the family, and her mother was depressed and couldn't get out of bed. And so she was holding the whole family in her hands. And she was 15 years old, and the school wanted to expel her. And it was, the saddest when you're going in and you're doing qualitative research, you need support sometimes because these are difficult places and you hear difficult things, and you're meant to report also if there's a problem, if you think there's abuse going on and so on. It's a whole other world, but anyway, I don't want to go there. But I just want to say that in one of the most advanced capitalist modern societies in Britain, the levels of devastation and poverty in our schools is shocking. And again, we need qualitative research like this to expose some of the issues. I just want to make one point about high academic performance. These girls were doing well. Bangladeshi girls have, in the last 15 or so years, topped the bill. They have gone from very few GCSEs to now going to Oxford University. And that was policies that we brought in under the Blair government for excellence in cities, places like Tower Hamlets, to have super heads, super schools with the best teachers, and those girls are now flourishing. So we are seeing in the stats, if you look at the Deaton Review, you'll see Bangladeshi girls actually doing well. But there was a sense in some of the schools, because remember, 87% of our teachers are white. So what happens in these schools is that there's this sense of they have to lose their Muslimness to move on, and they send them to places like Tower Hamlets to go and to go to local banks and law firms and stuff to be mentored. So they learn to shake people's hands, and it was really bizarre stuff went on because these girls are actually very sophisticated, but there was an assumption that they weren't. But anyway, but one of the shocking things was the mental health issues in the schools. So the girls, because they were seen as compliant and boys boisterous, so the boys got a lot of policy and school attention. But when I was interviewing the girls in the sixth form, I would say out of 100 girls, 12 of them had wanted to commit suicide, had body images, issues, all sorts of things, pressures from the family, being blackmailed by boys in their own community. And a lot of the black girls were being bullied by other black boys and for being ugly, for being what they call blick, darker than dark. So intercommunal and intercultural violence against each other was being played out, particularly at the sexual level. So I was really shocked by the levels of mental health issues in the schools. So if, again, with my model, this is a slightly better slide that PowerPoint did for me without my lines. Here we see, again, if we're to bring qualitative, statistical, and ethnographic work together, so we can see all these intersecting things. We've got class, poverty, and education, nationality with migration. A lot of the girls did not have migration status. They could be sent back any time. In these schools, they would be coming and they would be not speaking English, like 3 words of English, and so it was a lot going on. Nationality, migration, then racialization, like I was saying, even intergroup religion, patriarchy, ethnicity, and sexuality. I'm way over time, aren't I? So again, if we're doing intersectional research, you just don't look at what you're doing. You then have to pull it out and think about the discourses that are shaping her life. And so here we have some of the discourses that I would argue are shaping these young women's lives. So we have the public and private, that's the classic one, the family and the state. Whatever ChatGPT doing, we still live in nuclear families with those kind of dynamics of the public and the private, and violence against women and domestic violence and women's rights are really caught up. And then we have patriarchy and religion and masculinity, ethnicity, but also here we have honor and shame. So say there's violence, in a family, a girl is being abused by her brother, which happened in the study, you know, there's this shame, so you keep it quiet. We have in the kind of Christian Judeo thing, we've got guilt and redemption. You know, we've got all these cultural and ideological ways of keeping people in their place. And then we have sort of at the bottom these bigger forces of globalization and modernity and traditionalism and multiculturalism and Islamophobia, and the idea of, you know, the body, the Muslim body, embodying fear and risk. You know, when you see somebody, you know, I had a Muslim PhD student, and he had a beard, and he was actually doing his PhD on bearded Muslim men because, you know, the prejudice just by having that beard and how he's treated, you know, fear sticks to some bodies and not others. You are judged by your visible presence. So that's embodied intersectionality, as I was saying to you. It's about the body, it's about the lived experience and structural racism. And I'm so over time, yeah. I want to end with Audrey again. I want to reclaim intersectionality as a Black feminist theory because it has become a buzzword, and it's been removed from its roots to just mean, oh, let's do race, class, gender, blah, 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 blah. Let's talk about inclusivity and diversity, which are empty words. So Audrey says, and this is what I'm trying to do in my work, and I hope you do in yours, is that we have to define. You know, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And that's a message to Jack DP, because I think that's exactly what will happen to us. We'll be eaten alive. So we need to have our voices of our young people in this new world. Thank you.